Jessica sat across from Howard in the soft, ambient light of the upscale restaurant, her laughter flowing effortlessly like a skilled performer delivering a flawless act. On the surface, she appeared completely at ease, enjoying the evening as she leaned in to share a quiet joke with her lover, her eyes gleaming with amusement. But beneath the facade, turmoil churned within her. A gnawing sense of unease twisted her stomach, warning her that something was about to go terribly wrong. Each time her phone vibrated on the table, a jolt of panic shot through her, though she masked it quickly with a practiced smile. Howard, ever charming and relaxed, remained oblivious. He sipped his wine leisurely, as if nothing outside their intimate moment existed. But Jessica knew better. This affair had been reckless from the start, a dangerous game she had willingly played. Howard was everything her husband, Mike, was not: unpredictable, adventurous, thrilling. He had swept her away from the stability and kindness that had once drawn her to Mike. Mike, the man she had once adored with all her heart, had always been steady, reliable, and deeply loving. And yet, here she was, entangled in a relationship she couldn't justify, not even to herself. She had contemplated ending it many times, convincing herself that each meeting with Howard would be the last. But when the moment came, she could never bring herself to say the words. There was something intoxicating about him, an irresistible pull that always drew her back in. Tonight, however, something felt different. When her phone buzzed once more, she instinctively glanced at the screen. In an instant, all the warmth drained from her body. A new notification appeared. "Enjoy this evening because it will be over soon." The message was from Mike. Jessica's breath hitched. A cold sweat broke across her palms, her heart hammering against her ribs. She stared at the words, her mind racing to make sense of them. How could he know? What did he mean by, "it will be over soon"? The world around her blurred. The clinking of glasses, the soft murmur of conversation, all of it faded into the background. Her vision tunneled as she fought to steady her breathing. Howard, sensing the shift in her, leaned forward, concern flickering in his eyes. "Are you okay?" he asked gently, reaching for her hand. Jessica forced a small nod, willing her lips into a weak smile. But she wasn't okay. Her entire world was teetering on the edge of collapse, and she had no idea how to stop it. Howard lifted her trembling hand to his lips, brushing a kiss across her knuckles before leaning in to press his lips to hers. He continued speaking, his words dissolving into meaningless noise. Jessica barely heard him. Her focus remained locked on her phone, on the message that sent an icy dread creeping up her spine. Whatever Mike was planning, she was certain of one thing: tonight would not end the way she had imagined. It had all begun a month ago. Mike had always been a trusting husband, never questioning Jessica's whereabouts or the time she spent away from home. But that changed one evening when she returned late from dinner with friends. As she leaned in to kiss him goodnight, he caught a scent, an unfamiliar, expensive men's cologne. It wasn't his. That single moment planted the first seed of doubt. Mike was not the type to act impulsively. He was patient, observant, calculating. Instead of confronting her, he chose to watch and wait. And the more he watched, the more he noticed. Jessica's behavior had shifted. She seemed distant, preoccupied, her attention constantly drifting to her phone. She no longer left it unattended, always keeping it within reach, often smiling at the screen in a way that made something inside him tighten. The signs were there, clear as day. Jessica believed she was being careful, that her secret was well hidden. But Mike saw through it all. And he wasn't just waiting because he was hurt or confused. No, he was planning. Every affectionate word, every thoughtful gesture, was deliberate, concealing the storm brewing beneath his calm exterior. He had no intention of lashing out in anger or demanding answers. That wasn't his way. Instead, he was waiting for the perfect moment, when Jessica would be too entangled in her deception to see what was coming. Jessica's phone vibrated again, pulling her back into the present. Her pulse spiked as she hesitated before looking at the screen. "Do you really think no one will find out about this?" Her stomach twisted violently. The letters on the screen blurred as fear gripped her, tightening around her throat. She clenched the phone, her hands trembling. She had to stay composed. She couldn't just get up and leave, not here, not in a place where so many eyes could easily track her every move. But the air around her felt heavier by the second, the anxiety suffocating. She needed to breathe, to think. Howard continued talking, oblivious to the panic rising inside her. His voice faded into the background as her gaze darted anxiously around the restaurant. She scanned the faces of the other diners, some engaged in conversation, others enjoying their meals. Everything appeared normal. But something was wrong. She could feel it. Her pulse roared in her ears as she turned her head slightly, then stopped, her entire body going rigid. She had just locked eyes with someone sitting at a nearby table. The rapid beat of Jessica's pulse echoed in her ears. As she sat at the table, surrounded by the stern and unwavering faces of her family, her uncle, cousin, his wife, and her own sister, she felt their gaze pierce her, heavy with silent judgment. Though no words were exchanged, the message was clear. They knew. They knew everything. Her hands trembled as anxiety gripped her. The room seemed to close in on her, and the air felt thinner as her mind raced. Her family, always so rigid in their beliefs and values, would never forgive her if they learned of her betrayal. She felt as if her entire world was falling apart in that very moment, her secret life slipping away beyond her control. The weight of their disapproval pressed down on her, suffocating her. There was no need for words. One by one, they stood up, never breaking eye contact with her. In a slow, deliberate motion, they left the restaurant, each step amplifying the silence that enveloped her. It was as though their cold verdict was final, and Jessica was left to face it alone, drowning in their silent condemnation. Her thoughts spun uncontrollably. Mike, she realized, had orchestrated this. He had known all along and had now ensured her family found out as well. The walls she had so carefully built around her affair were crumbling, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Just days before this dinner, Mike had secretly met with Jessica's relatives. Calm and collected, he presented the evidence he had painstakingly collected: photos, texts, everything that exposed her betrayal. Initially, they had been shocked, doubting the allegations. But Mike had remained firm and resolute. He asked them not to confront her, not to intervene. Instead, he wanted them to watch as Jessica unraveled her own life. They had agreed, their faces heavy with disappointment, and now they were witnessing the fallout. As Jessica sat there, the once welcoming restaurant now felt suffocating, the atmosphere thick with guilt, as if everyone could see the shame written across her face. Howard, sitting across from her, noticed her distress. His brows furrowed in concern as he leaned in closer. "Jessica, what's going on?" he asked, his voice full of worry. "You're shaking. Are you okay?" She managed a weak smile, but it was no use. She couldn't explain to him what was happening, how her family's condemning stares and Mike's cryptic messages were pushing her toward the edge. She felt the panic rise within her, threatening to swallow her whole. "I love you," Howard said softly, his words full of sincerity. "If something's wrong, we'll figure it out. I'm not going anywhere. Let's leave. We can find somewhere quieter, just the two of us." Her chest tightened at his offer. She wanted to escape, to flee this nightmare, but her words caught in her throat. Just as she was about to speak, she heard a faint buzzing sound, Howard's phone. He glanced down, and in that instant, everything changed. His face drained of color, his smile vanished, and his eyes filled with a look of fear, something Jessica had never seen before. Without saying a word, Howard stood up, hastily grabbed his wallet, and quickly counted out money to cover the bill. "Howard, wait. What's going on? Did something happen?" Jessica asked, confused and desperate. He didn't answer. His movements were hurried, almost frantic, as though he was trying to escape something. Jessica reached out to him, anxiety rising within her. "Howard, talk to me. Let me come with you." Howard raised his hand to stop her, his voice colder than she had ever heard it. "No, I've got some serious issues to handle. This is going to take a while." Jessica's heart sank. She had never seen him act like this. As he turned to leave, she caught a fleeting glimpse of his phone screen before it went dark. It was a message from a woman, but she didn't catch the name. "Howard, please," she called after him, her voice breaking. But he didn't stop. He turned around briefly, offering her one final look. It was stern, distant, and it sent a chill running through her. "Goodbye, Jessica," he muttered before walking away, leaving her stunned and alone. For a long moment, Jessica sat there in disbelief. She had thought Howard was different, that he had no one else in his life. But now, as the pieces fell into place, she began to understand. He had been hiding something from her all along. A wife, a life that he had never mentioned. The man she thought she knew had his own secrets. Mike had known about Howard's double life long before Jessica ever suspected. Howard wasn't just some man seeking a bit of excitement. He had a wife, and their marriage was tied up in a complicated web of business and property that couldn't be easily undone. Rather than divorce, Howard had sought out affairs, living out his fantasies in secret. Mike, ever the patient strategist, had uncovered the truth. And a few days before this dinner, he had discreetly shared the details with Howard's wife. Now, as everything fell apart for Howard, Jessica sat alone at the table, the truth hitting her hard. Howard wasn't coming back. He wasn't going to comfort her. Jessica could feel it now, the certainty that Howard was slipping away from her life just like he had disappeared from the restaurant earlier. Her phone buzzed again, snapping her out of the heavy silence surrounding her. Sitting alone at the table, tears filled her eyes, which she tried desperately to hold back. Howard was gone. Her family had turned their backs on her, and now she realized she was completely alone. The screen on her phone lit up with another message from Mike. "Don't go home, Jessica. You don't have a home anymore." Panic gripped her chest, her heart racing as fear surged through her. The room around her blurred as she hurriedly got to her feet, almost knocking over her chair in her frantic state. She had to find a way to fix this, to make it right. There had to be a way, she told herself. She rushed out of the restaurant, gasping for air, her breath shallow as she fumbled with her keys. Finally, she managed to get into her car, her hands shaking as they gripped the steering wheel. The engine roared to life, and she sped off toward the apartment, her mind spinning in chaos, filled with disbelief. He couldn't have meant it. He wouldn't just throw me out like that, she thought, trying to calm herself. There had to be a way to explain it to Mike, to make him understand. But deep down, she knew the awful truth. Mike had planned this all along. When Jessica finally reached the apartment, a sick feeling overtook her. The door opened easily, but the familiar warmth she once felt when she walked inside was gone. The place now felt cold and empty. Her footsteps echoed in the silence, and when her eyes landed on the sight before her, it felt as though the ground beneath her feet was slipping away. In the center of the living room were several cardboard boxes, carefully packed with all her belongings, her clothes, shoes, books, everything that had once made this apartment feel like home. It was all reduced to a few boxes. On the shelf, there were two piles of papers waiting for her. One was a stack of divorce papers, and the other was a torn-up lease agreement. Jessica gasped, her breath catching in her throat. The weight of reality hit her like a ton of bricks. Mike had ended the lease, and she had to leave by tomorrow. Her chest tightened, and the tears that she had been holding back flowed freely. Sobbing uncontrollably, she collapsed to the floor, clutching the divorce papers as the gravity of her choices crashed down on her. Mike had planned every detail with chilling precision. The apartment, always in his name, was something Jessica had never questioned. But now it gave him the power to do this. While she had been at dinner with Howard, believing her life was still intact, Mike had moved quickly. He packed her things into boxes, placing them where she couldn't ignore them. He signed the divorce papers, leaving them alongside the ripped-up lease as a clear message. Her life here was over. There were no harsh words, no explosive confrontations. Mike didn't want a scene. He wanted Jessica to understand the consequences when it was already too late. As Jessica sat on the floor, her face wet with tears, her phone buzzed once more. The final message from Mike appeared on the screen. "Jessica, you have made your choice." Jessica lay there, feeling the weight of the situation pressed down on her. The apartment, which had once been filled with warmth and love, now felt like a lifeless tomb, cold and empty, with only the boxes as reminders of what she had lost. Her tears seemed endless as she struggled to grasp the finality of it all. In a haze of desperation, Jessica reached for her phone, her trembling fingers hovering over Mike's contact before pressing call. The phone rang, each long beep echoing in the empty apartment, each sound slicing through her like a knife. But there was no answer. Mike was ignoring her. She thought about the future they had planned together. In just 3 months, they were supposed to buy a house, leave the city behind, start fresh. They had even discussed having children. They had dreams, a future built on love. And now, everything was shattered because of one reckless affair. Jessica never wanted to lose Mike. She didn't want to lose everything. All she wanted was that thrill, that excitement with Howard. She thought it would be harmless, a brief affair. She never imagined it would destroy her life. In the midst of her despair, she thought about Howard. Maybe he would help her. Maybe he would explain things. She dialed his number, holding her breath, waiting for him to pick up. But there was nothing. Not even a single beep. Confused, she tried again, but the same cold silence met her. It took a moment before it sank in. Howard had blocked her. He had cut her off completely. He had vanished from her life, just like that, slipping away into the shadows where their affair had existed. Her heart sank, the tightness in her chest growing as a feeling of abandonment overwhelmed her. Had she meant nothing to him at all? The pain inside her grew unbearable, and a wave of rage surged within her. Anger at the world, at herself, at everything. She jumped to her feet and, in a fit of frustration, kicked the nearest box, sending it flying across the room. With a burst of anger, she struck another box, causing its contents to spill across the floor. Clothes, Books and mementos from her time with Mike scattered everywhere, like shattered fragments of her heart. She screamed, kicking and thrashing around, pouring out every ounce of her agony until her muscles burned and her breath came in sharp, desperate gasps. After what felt like an eternity, she slumped to the ground, utterly drained. The mess she had made surrounded her, and tears streaked her face as she struggled to breathe, her chest heaving. Feeling completely adrift, she shakily reached for her phone again and dialed her uncle's number. He picked up after 2 rings, his voice stern and heavy, the weight of past conversations hanging in the air. A long silence filled the space between them, the memory of his cold, judging gaze at the restaurant still fresh in her mind. "Uncle, I need your help," Jessica whispered, her voice quivering. Her uncle's response came quick, hard, and unforgiving. "My girl, you've made a huge mistake. This is a disgrace to our family." Jessica's sobs were barely contained as she fought for composure. "Please, I'm so sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen. I need you." Her uncle's voice grew heavier, the weight of disappointment clear. "I promised your father, Jessica. I promised him I would take care of you. But what you've done is worse than just betraying Mike. You've betrayed all of us, your father, your family. You've put us all in a difficult position." "I didn't mean to," Jessica choked out, the words barely audible through her tears. "I never wanted this." For a long moment, there was only silence on the line. Then, with a deep, weary sigh, her uncle's tone softened slightly. "Family doesn't turn its back on each other. I won't abandon you, Jessica. But you need to understand that you have to make things right. It won't be easy, and nothing will be the same between us until you've done that." Jessica felt her heart shatter once more as her uncle's words echoed in her mind, the weight of the shame pulling her down even further. But in that moment, she realized she wasn't entirely alone. "Thank you, Uncle," she whispered, her voice barely a sound. "Don't thank me yet," he replied, his tone still firm. "The road ahead is long. You'll have to work to regain our trust." With that, the call ended, leaving Jessica in a profound silence. She dropped her phone, her body heavy with despair, unable to move. All she could do was lie there, curled up on the cold floor, as the darkness of the night consumed her. Hours passed without her noticing, and she remained unmoving, lost in her own grief. It wasn't until the first light of dawn crept through the window that she finally stirred, casting faint shadows on the walls of the empty apartment.